Well, we're back to talk aviation into the month of March now. And Martin, you're not sitting next to me again. What's going on?
No, I'm back in Palmerston.
You liked it so much the first time, you've gone back.
I'm back in Palmy again.
And don't tell me it's just for the day.
No, it's for the rest of the week.
Oh, okay, so you're really making the most of it.
Indeed I am.
All right, quite an interesting episode of our aviation podcast this time round. Martin, you would have seen the story from last week. Finally, after 25 years of slow, methodical perseverance, pulling people in on the job, trying to get companies to help out with restoration of the first 727 E1, Boeing called the prototype 727 E1. It went to United Airlines as N7001U. And Martin spent its whole life operating for the airline, which is sort of quite unusual because most prototypes don't get to airline service, do they? They're sort of mothballed or used for other testing. It's always maybe too expensive or too complicated to put the aircraft back into the airline production standard. But this 72 went and did, I think, close to 27 years of service. It cost $4.3 million, Martin, when they bought the thing in 1962. It's estimated that the aircraft generated over $300 million worth of business or returns to United in the time it operated from the airline. So it's pretty cool.
That was really unusual in those days for a prototype to go straight into service because, as we know from other programs, prototypes up until quite recently were generally dogs.
E2, which was the second 72 made, that stayed with Boeing, and I believe it still remains in pieces at the factory at Boeing Field in Everett. So anyway, the man responsible for leading the project to restore this aircraft over all that time, for getting it originally and then restoring it back to flying condition, where it flew from Boeing Field to the Museum of Flight near Seattle last week, was a guy called Bob Bogash. I might have mentioned him before on some of our programs. I met him along with a couple of friends of mine up in Seattle back in 2003. And he took us quite literally, Martin, on this adventure. You've seen some of the footage. Over to Moses Lake to see the number 1 737, which was located there at the time. That's since been flown back to the museum. And then we went back to Boeing Field and saw that 727. And when we were there, they'd just turned the power on. Okay, they just got it to the point where they could plug the external power unit into the plug on the side of the aircraft and it would sort of light up. That was, 13 years ago. And he took us also to have a look at the number 174 at Boeing Field. Now, the reason I'm mentioning these things is because these were all on Bob's checklist to restore and then have put in the new pavilion at the Museum of Flight on display, forever and a day. And as much as possible, he wanted them to be airworthy aircraft. Well, they were in terms of the 7.3, and as everyone saw, that beautiful 7.2, they got that back to flying condition, flew it into the airfield, and now it's there for everyone to see. I had the opportunity to interview Bob just the last few days, Martin, so we're going to hear some of that interview in the second part of the program. The guy really deserves a medal, quite frankly.
Well, from listening to him, he does sound like a bit of a force of nature, doesn't he? I mean, he managed to talk British Airways into giving them a Concorde,
That's right.
Which was pretty good.
And then he turned up on their doorstep demanding it when they retired them,
Good on him.
But we'll hear some of that interview shortly. First of all, let's get to some of the things that have been happening in the last fortnight or so. Where should we start, Martin? MH370, another bit?
Yes, that's becoming a pretty regular occurrence, isn't it? And it's always off Mozambique or Reunion or somewhere over there. Another bit of light aircraft panels or something floats to the beach and confounds everybody.
Yeah, I think the latest one had some writing on it, actually, no step. And now I'm obviously no expert, and we're looking at images, that have been tweeted or just sort of put up. I don't think there are too many items out there in the same font as you would see on, aircraft wings floating around with those words on it. So if it's not MH370, it must be possible to narrow it down to whatever it is, because there are only a handful or less of missing items.
Although, and I keep saying this, and it always surprises me, is how littered the Indian Ocean appears to be with rubbish.
Yeah, but this is very specific rubbish, isn't it?
It is pretty specific, and the material it's made of, it's definitely from an aeroplane.
It's honeycomb, isn't it?
Yeah, highly likely it's from MH370. you just wonder whether that's going to change their thinking. And there's these two sort of sleuths who are convinced that they're searching 500 miles too far to the sort of northwest, and that they should go back to the area originally identified from satellite photos as having had a lot of floating wreckage in it. But when the ships got there, they couldn't see anything. That's about, 500 and something miles further south of Perth. These guys have gone through all the evidence and everything, and they reckon for $5 million they could rule it out.
And I think about 230 mil has been spent so far, so that's not much in that total. So basically, it's looking like it may have gone way south.
These guys, their theory is pretty much in line with what a number of people were saying right at the time. They don't think it was anything sinister. They believe it was more than likely a cockpit fire. They believe that initial turn south was the crew trying to make it to an island with a runway that was not too far off their flight path.
Yeah.
They believe between that turn and subsequent events, they lost complete control of the plane. The plane flew to the end of its range and then made a relatively high-speed crash into the ocean.
Yeah. Yes, because if the autopilot was still engaged, and it's possible, I don't know, how do the digital electronics work on aircraft like that? Let's say the cockpit is burnt out, a la the Egyptian Airlines images we're familiar with. Would the modes that the aircraft flight system were in at the time, would they be maintained if the equipment bay underneath is intact?
That's their theory. They think as long as the equipment bay underneath wasn't being burnt out at the time, it would have just stayed on whatever course they'd last set it to when they abandoned the cockpit.
Right. Gosh. Okay. I had a thought recently that one of the theories that hadn't sort of popped up for any discussion really that I could see anyway, and had precedence in history, was a crew member, not a flight crew member, a non-flight crew member, or a recently disemployed member of staff from the airline could have run amok. That's happened before. PSA Airlines, the 146, I think in Southern California, a former employee went into the cockpit, and I think he actually shot the two pilots dead and crashed the plane. FedEx, remember that FedEx incident with
the hammer attack?
Yeah, the hammer attack. They managed to land amazingly. I think it was terrible injuries for the crew before the guy was overpowered. That's happened. And also there was an occurrence in New Zealand I've seen written up in the history back in the 50s. A mechanic for NAC, the airline, went nuts, thought he was a pilot, and actually grabbed a Lockheed Lodestar, went out onto the line, I think it was in the weekend or something, and got into the aircraft, started up and tried to take it off and crashed. So, you get these personalities, is my point. That is within the realm of possibilities too. Someone who has a grudge or has a mental illness, wants to be a pilot, decides to take it. This is my opportunity. I'm going to take over the plane, and then doesn't know what to do, locked in the cockpit. Same thing. But bound to be some more bits that come to light. We'll see.
Yeah.
Now, last program we talked about Boeing's move to block the C Series from United Airlines. And we were talking about the discounts that could have been operating. I think it was for the 7 MAX, which was the sort of like a slightly unexpected version.
That is now confirmed. So United's taken a whole bunch of these planes. It's been basically confirmed that the reason they got such a good deal was Boeing did not want the C Series to enter service with a major American airline.
Yeah.
However, Delta are now very interested in this C Series, apparently, so we'll see how well that worked. And as part of the deal, it looks like United have converted some of their 787 orders to 777-300 ERs, which is another plane Boeing is particularly keen on selling at the moment because they've got to bridge that production gap between the old and the new. So they're not taking 787s and are taking 777-300 ERs, which again is very interesting. They must be getting them for buttons as well.
Yes.
A lot of analysts are quite worried about this production gap because the current generation of 777s not selling that well at all, because A, there's a newer plane on the horizon, and B, there's a very interesting article which I'll put up a link to of how a $7 million 777-200ER compares with a newer plane, particularly in the current environment of low oil prices.
It's probably not too much between them.
Well, not when you're only spending $7 million on it. So no matter how cheap the 787 is, it's still going to be 30, 40, 50, $60 million more than seven.
The Canadian government's sort of come to the rescue, is that a way of putting it, of the Bombardier company. They've set up a new company to build the C Series and have taken a third share in that, along with Bombardier and I think another company, which sort of tells you that Bombardier were in a stress situation over the whole thing.
Definitely in a stress situation, definitely. It's been kind of a perfect storm for them. The program was delayed, and some people are saying they probably concentrated on the incorrect variant from the beginning, because Boeing's not particularly worried about the current C Series. They're really worried about the 300, which is test flying at the moment.
Because that competes with their product, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a 160-seater, very efficient, by all accounts, a fantastic aircraft. That's what they want to keep out of the market.
Okay, a couple of other issues that we can touch on. I've always been interested in Turkish Airlines. We've talked about Turkish Airlines quite often, here and there. They've got a big fleet, 261 aircraft at the moment, heading towards 300, I think, is their goal. The reason that I bring this up, because there's a new international airport hub opening in Istanbul shortly, which is designed to process over 120 million passengers a year. It looks like Turkish Airlines are going head-to-head, really, in a big way, with Emirates to become one of these global transportation systems, taking advantage of that hub location. This is going to be a battle of the giants. And
it is.
I wonder who's going to win.
Well, you wonder when they're going to start calling them the Middle Eastern Four as well, because Turkish is in that part of the world, whether it's the Middle East or not, who knows, but they're following a very similar model, and the amount of destinations they cover is it's staggering. They got nearly 300 aircraft. They soon will have over 300 aircraft, but they're already serving over 300 destinations.
Yeah, so the connectivity is amazing. They're not making the money that Emirates is making.
No, they're moving about 60-something million passengers a year, and they made just on $1 billion, whereas Emirates moved just under 50 million passengers last year and made substantially over $1 billion. So there certainly are efficiencies Emirates has, which Turkish doesn't seem to have at this point. But still, they're making a lot of money. They're flying to a lot of places. And if you want to go east-west from Europe into all sorts of Asian places that you've never even heard of, Turkish is a pretty good bet.
And the stats on the new airport are quite stunning. It'll have 6 runways, 500 aircraft parking spots, and the capacity to accommodate, I undershot, 150 million passengers, which is more than twice their ability at the moment. So politically, though, and given, I don't know, the instability of the region, that could be a problem for them.
That's obviously going to be the thing they're most worried about. It wouldn't take many more terrorist attacks in Ankara or somewhere like that, in Istanbul, to start getting people very worried.
They've certainly got money to spend, though, haven't they? They've got the dollars.
Well, the airline made $1 billion last year, so even on its own they've got money to spend, but it's probably also a bit of a state-building exercise by the Turkish government to promote the airline. They've seen how well it's worked for the other carriers in the region and are going hard. Good on them, I suppose.
They plan to invest $3.74 billion this year alone on planes. So there you go. Speaking of Emirates, or mentioning Emirates there, we covered the initiation of the service, direct service between Auckland and Dubai when we went to publish. What we didn't know is that they put an A380 on for that first service on the first day. So you had 4 A380s on the ground. I saw the picture, actually. 4 A380s on the ground in Auckland in one day. And I got to say, that airline did very well for publicity from that. It was all over the media. There were people blogging live on the flight because, of course, you got Wi-Fi on board. A very good look for that carrier. I think they got a big bang for their buck there.
It did look very impressive, didn't it, having them all 4 of them lined up?
And why would you do that? That's a shot across the bow, isn't it? That's saying, okay, it's going to start off as a 777-200 LR, but just to show you the instruments of torture, here's what we could make it if we wanted, and by the way, there's almost a third more on board again, so good luck.
Yes, although an A380 over that distance in the current configuration is probably not entirely realistic, but I think what Emirates have cottoned onto more than most of the other carriers did, certainly Emirates cottoned onto it a lot earlier, is the so-called halo effect of seeing another A380 drifting down towards your city. It's an amazing marketing tool. People are fascinated by that aircraft, and Emirates have constantly said A380s bring passengers.
And I noticed also, Martin, I don't know if you've been following the presidential primaries going on at the moment, that Bernie Sanders is getting around in that Eastern 737-800.
That's frugal compared to the Trump 75, hey?
Oh, yeah. So it's good to see that little airline's got some work, is really the point I'm making.
Yeah. Well, Eastern, Bernie's all about Eastern.
And Martin, good to see that the Nelson maintenance base has picked up a contract for, I think, ATR maintenance for New Caledonian Airline. That's good news for Nelson.
Yeah, it's the regional airline Air Caledonie, I believe it's called. And yeah, it's all about turning the Nelson base into the Australasian Centre for turboprop maintenance. So
yeah.
Good, real good.
Yeah, well, that's the sort of development you want. That's the sort of regional development we want.
Absolutely.
All good. All right, so that's a quick whip around some of the stories that are out there. I know there are a lot more. We could talk more about them, but we want to be able to get in our feature interview, which is with Bob Bogash. Just a quick reminder to the folks, Martin, that it was just about a week ago that the final flight of the first 727 was made. This is the final flight ever. And the first flight after 25 years of being restored at Payne Field up in Everett. That's where they produced the 7.4 and the 7.6 and the 7.8, so on, 777. Pilot Tim Powell, co-pilot Mike Scott, engineer Ralph Pascal, and safety officer Bob Bogash were on board. And Martin, as I mentioned at the start of the program, I met Bob back in 2003. Before we get into parts of the interview, I'm going to start with a little piece from Bob's presentation at the welcoming ceremony of the aircraft at Boeing Field last week, where he talks about, and he says it so well, Martin, the relationship between a high-performance machine and the people, the humans that have a relationship with it through its life. So I'm going to play a bit of that, and then we're going to go into the interview with Bob, and he'll explain how he did the restoration leading up to that final flight.
Truly, an airplane is a partnership with man, and the partnership is not always equal. They definitely have a mind of their own, in many ways like the relationship between a jockey and a fine, thoroughbred racehorse. And being a racehorse and being alive, it stands to reason, to me anyway, that they are alive, and being alive, they have souls. They talk to us, they certainly talk to me, and their spirits impress themselves on us. And as an example, take this big, drop-dead, gorgeous airplane we see behind us. She was born more than a half-century ago and connected with her human partners in an amazing continuum. From her first moments as lines flowing out on a drafting table's paper, representing the engineers and artists, to the skilled craftsmen who turned those lines into real parts that assembled into a beautiful creature, to the pilots who first pointed her nose to the heavens, and the people who rode in her and, like God, looked down on clouds and the firmament below. Some 3 million of them did so in this airplane. And even today, in her senior years, she's still the belle of the ball to loving admirers, like everybody here who watched her come in today. Picture a typical day in her life, arriving at a gate at a busy air terminal as the whine of her engines dies out. Her passengers collect their things and deplane to meet relatives or go to business meetings or start vacations. People of all shapes, ages, and sizes. The flight crew pack up their briefcases and walk off, as do the flight attendants. Swarms of workers flutter as they clean and service and fuel, to be followed by more pilots climbing on, and cabin attendants, and more passengers, until she pushes out, starts her engines, and climbs once again into the sky. And she, this airplane here, has done that more than 48,000 times. And the same story is present in the maintenance side, where she gets pulled into a hangar and is instantly surrounded by stands and jacks and mechanics, probing her every nook and cranny. These people are the other half of my story, the ghosts, who have surrounded her from conception until today. If you close your eyes, you can see all of them from here, like the ball players coming out of the cornfield. And the one continuum, the one constant in this fable is the airplane, our airplane, the living, breathing thoroughbred, working hard alongside her human partners. As those people came and went, she continued and endured. The one common thread in this half-century tale of activity that I've just described is the airplane. Even in her quarter-century of retirement, her spirit lived on as her admirers worked to let her taste the skies one more time. And so, as you walk around our airplane or go aboard, pause and look around. Close your eyes and see them, including all of us who will soon also fade back into the cornfield. Her ghosts of past and present. Like those before, we will be her ghosts someday while she endures. Thanks to lots of hard work and belief by the management and trustees and the volunteers of this great museum, she will slumber contentedly. You who see her in the new pavilion will know, as we proved today, that the miracle of flight still resides in her graceful wings. And in her body, an airplane's heart beats still.
Bob, thank you so much for giving us some time on our podcast. This has been big news the last week or so in aviation circles, but it's in the general media as well. It's your project, and we're going to talk about the flight. You're on board, I think. You can tell us about that. But let's just go back to where this started, 1995, I believe. And I think you were retiring or about to retire or just retired from Boeing. And what were you sort of looking for something to do?
I never looked for anything to do, Paul. This really started in 1984, 32 years ago, when I first asked United if they would donate this airplane to the museum, it being the prototype and in service with them, and them having agreed, and then the airplane having actually been donated in 1991, and then arriving at Payne Field in Everett because the museum as it exists now didn't exist and there was no space for it. So in 1995, correct, 20 years ago, so that's 25 years that the airplane has arrived and it's been sitting there. 20 years ago in 1995, I retired and then began working on this along with, as you know, a whole bunch of other airplanes, including the number one 37, 47, and Concorde and Constellation and Lockheed Electra and on and on. So, a parish priest likes a lot of people in the congregation, and I collect. Some people collect airplane models. I collect real airplanes. So,
well, what's it like? I'm going to ask you this: what's it like? You get someone to sort of like pledge an airplane sometime later when it's retired.
Yeah.
When you go back and sort of call that up, what's it like? Do they forget about it, or do you have to sort of like prize it away from them? How does it work?
Well, in the case of the 727, that worked out okay because they remembered, and in 1987, I believe they brought the airplane to Boeing Field for a sort of a pre-retirement donation ceremony, and they named the airplane then the Spirit of Seattle and did a lot of PR work. So that one worked well. In the case of the Concorde, that was the same year, 1984, that I asked Lord King at British Airways for a Concorde, and then in 2003, which was, 19 years later, he had retired and a lot of the management was long gone, and so they conveniently forgot that. So we had to kind of re-jog their memory, and in a lot of these cases, I try and keep the pipeline open every year or two to make sure that people remember, but then the cast of characters changes also, and so it's difficult. I try and hang on to my documentation, not that that means anything, but it's all worked out so far. So I can't think of any others that I'm looking to get kind of a pre-retirement pledge for. But if you give me time, I might think of one.
Maybe I was going to ask you that a bit later on. And also back in that time, 95, let's use that as the sort of date, the internet had come along too, and that's been a help, hasn't it? Organising people, getting this project going?
You can't be a one-man band on this, Paul. Let me tell you. We're dealing with a whole lot of people who are basically volunteers for the most part. There was like one paid entity in this whole thing, which was SOAR, a company from California that repairs damaged airplanes that I hired on to do the touch labor. But in that case, also, they agreed to do it at their cost and not their normal rates. But virtually all the rest, and there was maybe 25 companies, and I can't tell you how many volunteers, maybe 50 or 100 over the years, donated their services and their time, etc., for nothing. Some of them are retired, but a lot of these are going concerns who, they're trying to make a living. ATS was the MRO, the maintenance repair organization that we used. They've got tons and tons of business. They got airplanes all outside their ramp, and their hangars are all full. And yet, we got a lot of time in the hangar. We got a lot of time on their ramp and all their facilities. So it's a question of jockeying all these people around, and it's a big job. I'm not trying to tell you I did a big job, but it's a big job.
Yeah.
It's like being the master of ceremonies in a circus. If you can picture that guy with the long tails and the top hat, and that's I didn't have a chair and a whip, but I had everything else.
Now, when United gave you the airplane, I remember when we were there visiting it, I think you told us that it wasn't in a very good state. They took a lot of parts off it. Has that made it more difficult to get to where you got to?
Yeah, well, the airplane arrived, it was in perfect condition. Its last flight was a revenue flight from San Francisco to Seattle, and they sold tickets on it, and so the airplane was very airworthy. But then, for whatever reason, the head of the museum at that time cut a deal with United, and they came in with a crew and cannibalized the whole airplane. So they took everything of value off the airplane. And so the next 25 years, we've tried to spend getting all those parts back and putting them back on the airplane. And so we eventually did that. And to do that, really, there's one company that's helped us, and we couldn't have done this without them. And this is an example of a company that's doing stuff for nothing, and that's FedEx. In 2004 or 5, they gave us an airplane, complete airplane that we could use for parts. And then this past summer, they gave us the 3 flight engines that we eventually used to fly the airplane. So that was how we kind of restored the airplane. But there were altogether like 6 different airplanes that donated parts to the project. And then even with those, we went out and had to get a lot of parts over the last 2 months as well.
Yeah, it just seemed a bit off to take all the parts off it, knowing that you guys would have to do extra work in the future. There you go.
Well, I don't know. I could complain about that. At the time they had a large 727 fleet, and they wanted the parts to service their in-service fleet, and it's as it turned out, they really never used those parts. That's kind of life in the big city. I actually went down there. They took all their parts and put them in a warehouse near San Francisco. And in 1997, I think I went down there and looked in the warehouse, and there were all of our parts still sitting there on the shelf, never got used.
Oh, dear. Oh, well, there you go.
So, yeah.
So when we were there, I think you just switched the electrical power on. That was a long time ago now. So,
yeah.
But it all, in terms of noticing it as the project was coming to its culmination, it looks like a lot of stuff happened just in the very recent past. So was it a continual effort all the way, or was it fits and starts all the way?
Oh, it was fits and starts all the way. From 95 to 04 or 05, when we got the FedEx airplane, we did a lot of wheel spinning. We didn't have parts, and there was very little we could do. We had wash parties where we cleaned the airplane and stuff like that, but it wasn't until we got that FedEx airplane that we really had something that we could start doing and putting all those parts on. And then after that, there were fits and starts, and a lot of the fits and starts were in the management and the museum. The museum was evolving, and they couldn't decide whether they wanted to what they wanted in terms of their roster at the main museum at Boeing Field, and so there was talk about, well, maybe we should just leave that airplane up in Payne Field in Everett, or maybe we should cut it up, or maybe we should take it apart and truck it downtown, or maybe we should fly it. And so I think half of what I do is politicking with management to get them to decide, and for my knothole, to get them to move in the direction that I want them to move.
Right, so you're subtly sort of pushing them a particular way, maybe.
Yeah, and I push through the management and through the board of trustees, and I know a lot of people there. At the end of the day, I Well, I did several things, one of which was to suggest that we just scrap the airplane, and of course that was kind of overkill, but it worked, and there was a lot of, we can't do that kind of stuff. And so then we moved on to moving it down. You know, the museum, I have to tell you, just built a huge new building, bigger than the Smithsonian's building.
Yeah, I see that. Wow.
At Washington, D.C., Dulles Airport. And so we're right in the process of moving all our airplanes in. We started construction on that a year ago. So after we did that, we rearranged all the airplanes inside with little models and figured out what could go where, and the decision was made that this airplane had to be part of the collection. So, okay, now we're going to move it. Are we going to truck it, or are we going to fly it? Well, there was no doubt in my mind that I was going to fly it from day one. I wasn't going to be part of taking it apart, and the way I solved that problem was by going out and getting bids on moving it by surface, and that gave me a target, and then I could go to them, and I did some estimating, and I figured I could move it for the same price or less by flying it than by disassembling it. So eventually those numbers were firmed up. I got bids from various outfits. So I was able to go and say, not only do we get a better airplane or a better artifact down at the museum by flying it in, because it's an intact airplane then, but I can also save you guys money. And so, you know, that's the part that they all like. So that's what we did. And actually, we're coming in now, reviewing my budgets last week. I will definitely come in cheaper than moving it by surface, and I think if I'm lucky, I might come in at half the price.
Wow, that's great going. And also, you get great global publicity, let me tell you.
Yes, well, deservedly so, I might say. You know, there's a whole lot of reasons for this. It's a historic airplane. It's the number one, went into service with an airline unlike our other number ones. It did all the flight testing, etc. Then it spent 27 years flying for United, which was, a big, long career. And then on top of all that, then it sat kind of, I won't say derelict, but it sat for 25 years, and so here, a quarter of a century later, we're going to bring it back to life and actually fly it again. So, I think that's a good story. It's a good story from the point of view of myself or airplane fans, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's also struck a resonant chord with the non-aviation community, because media's gone, there's total media frenzy over this. Another thing that's of value to the museum itself, because they're non-profit, and so they're looking for ways to revenue streams and bring people in the door to see the airplane, and a lot of press coverage and all those kinds of things. I think it was tremendous, really, and I'm proud to be part of this thing. It was wonderful to see it fly one more time. Airplanes are meant to fly. I firmly believe that, and airplanes in museums ought to be airworthy, except that you're not flying them, but they could fly.
Yeah. No, I think just being a sort of a person who goes to museums and looks at things, I think you can tell if an artifact has something about it, if it is still working, still in working condition.
Absolutely. And some of those museum airplanes, wind up getting pushed out the door and gassed up, and then they actually do fly again. There's something. Well, as a Glacier Girl is that P-38 they pulled out of the Greenland ice cap, and on it. There's something about an airplane that actually gets to fly again. And I do a lot of talking about that in speeches and stuff I write. Airplanes being living things, and I think they are living things. In this case, we brought this airplane back to life, and it was just glorious to be able to see it fly and to be in it when it flew on its last flight.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that, because I see that you're on board, and a couple of pics you've taken there on the approach there. I hope we can maybe put a few of those up on our video version, if that's all right. But what was that like? It must have been exhilarating, all that work intersecting at that one, because it was less than 15-minute flight, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know how long it was, to be honest. It was about 12 or 15 minutes, and yeah, it was exhilarating. I don't know if that's the right word. I don't really know what the word is. A lot of people have asked me. We were very busy. The crew was very busy. I was trying to do 100 things, and there was never any doubt in my mind that the airplane would fly or that it could fly safely. We'd run the engines a lot. I'd run it up and down the runway a lot. We'd gotten up to 100 knots there last week, so the engines worked and the brakes worked and everything, so it was just a case of flying the airplane. Immediately after we got off the ground, you could see that it flew really well, and it did fly very well.
Yeah, looked great.
It flew hands off, in trim, and it flew very nicely. And so, I wasn't surprised. I really don't know what. I'd have to think about what word would fit in that little hole there, but I don't know what it is right now. We charged down there, I was the river pilot, so to speak, because I fly my airplane between those two airports many times a week.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
I had the local knowledge of air traffic control and all the different altitudes and whatever needed, and so I could just whisper in the pilot's ear, so to speak, although there's not much to know. You just follow Puget Sound south, and there you go.
Yeah, yeah. The aircraft is iconic because just, looking around at some of the video in anticipation of talking with you, there's any airport scene that you see from TV or the movies from the 70s, there'll be a couple of 727s sort of lining up or taxiing along the runway. It has that it captures an era.
Yes, it does. Well, the 727, we built over 1,800 of them, and they were in very widespread use throughout North America, but also throughout the world. And certainly we're in Australia and Europe and South America, so it was a very ubiquitous airplane at the time. It was building 1,800 airplanes, basically was like twice as many as the 707 and 4 times as many as the DC-8. So it was a huge production run. In this country, they used to call it the LaGuardia airplane. The airplane was actually designed to fly in the LaGuardia Airport, which had 5,000-foot runways at the time, and would be the first jet to actually fly in there. And later on, in 1968, I was a Boeing service rep at LaGuardia, and we could see 50 or 100 727s there on the ground at any one time. The whole airport was covered with them. It was, in fact, the LaGuardia airplane, and the same thing at O'Hare and Atlanta and Los Angeles and on and on and on. Actually, I don't think there were any in Kiwi land, but the Aussies had a ton of them. TAA and Ansett flew sizable fleets of 727s.
We had a few here, actually ex-United ones, the ones with a cargo door in them, flying for the Air Force, like second or third hand for a while. So we did have a couple kicking around.
Right.
Here.
But so what you say is true. It was a short to medium range airplane, and it was very widely used. And I read a lot of stuff on the internet, etc. A lot of people nostalgic about it, but they kind of talk about it like, gee, I wish I could have flown on one, or something like that. But in the old days, which to me don't seem all that old or long ago, everybody had flown on one of those things many times.
Yeah.
But when you walked out the jetway, that was what was at the end of the jetway was a 727.
And into, reasonably small size cities, which was a new thing as well, right?
Yes, well, of course, to mention going into 5,000-foot LaGuardia Field, if you look at the wings on that airplane, of course, it has a very sophisticated high-lift system, combination of slats and Kruger flaps on the leading edge and triple-slotted flaps that extend to 40 degrees on the trailing edge. And the airplane can fly very slowly and into very short fields. That whole high-lift system was actually replicated again on the 737, which had the exact same system, and on the 747 again. So it was kind of the pioneer for 3 different airplane types that Boeing made. One of the things that we're contemplating right now, we were thinking about doing it yesterday, but I put that decision off a little bit. That's to have all of the high-lift devices out on one wing and all of them retracted on the other,
right,
so people can walk around and see the dramatic difference between flaps up and flaps down.
Well, I can vouch for the popularity of that. I've got a video that I shot years ago in Australia, one of the Ansett ones of it coming apart and going back together, and people just can't get enough of it. It's got tens of thousands of views. So, yeah, that would be popular based on the video views.
Well, maybe, I'm glad you told me that because, that's what I wanted to do, and I convinced everybody else to do it, but then yesterday I got cold feet, and I said, let's leave it for a while the way she is. If nothing else, it would generate questions because people would walk around and say, who don't know anything about airplanes and say, why does it look so different on one side versus the other side? And that would be a an entry point for the guide to say, well, I'm glad
Totally.
you asked me that.
The major comment I get on that one, just so you know, is that they can't believe so much can come out of the wing. They just can't believe that so much, surface sort of appears from nowhere,
Yeah.
Couple more questions, re the 7.2, just for the plane buffs listening, because of course the de Havilland company had the Trident at about the same time. Is that just coincidental, serendipitous timing, or did the two know what each other were working on? Because they're very similar, aren't they? The 727, I know it's bigger, got more power, of course, and more successful, and the Trident. And I think there was talk of some sort of crossover at some point in those programs.
I'd have to go back and read a little bit, but I have done research. There's a lot of UKers who insinuated that Boeing just copied the Trident, and I think what I've seen is if you go back and you look at the program histories, that is, the actual program histories using internal documents at the time, that the two programs actually were running kind of simultaneously and unbeknownst to the other. That's why so many similar airplanes wind up coming out. There's also the Tu-154, which is another version of that, and there's the Yak 40 and 42, and of course there's the Falcon, was the Falcon 50 and 900 and 2000 series, which are tri-jets. If you look at the engineering requirements and you say, well, gee, I've got, I want to do more than a twin can do for me, but I don't want to have four engines, so I need 3 engines, and so where am I going to put 3 engines? In the days of the Ford Tri-Motor or airplanes like that, you could put the third engine in the front, but you can't do that with a jet exactly, so you wind up with 3 engines in the rear, and there you go. The Trident probably could have been a lot more successful if it hadn't been point designed for BEA, and it didn't have the size of the range. That was the problem with the Comet too, really. It was designed for an operator or 1 or 2 operators, and I think the industry realizes now that you got to design an airplane using inputs from a wide spectrum of potential customers so that you get it right. And the 27, of course, was Eastern and United played big roles in that, and so LaGuardia was the key, and I think New York, Atlanta was the key for Eastern, and probably Chicago, LA, or something for United. Anyway, that's what happened. I think the body diameter also was too small on the Trident, and that harmed the market as well. But I've flown on Tridents, and I'll tell you one other thing here, Paul. You can see the pictures that came out of this airplane flying Wednesday. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, but frankly, of all of the Boeing transport airplanes, the 727 is, arguably the best looking of the lot.
Probably go along with that, actually. Yeah.
It's a very good looking flying machine, and so that's important too. I'm a big Connie lover, and we have a beautiful Super G in front of the museum sitting there, and I've given lots of talks on Connies. I've always loved Connies, and the world is full of Connie lovers, really. It's hard to find DC-6B lovers,
Yes.
but it's easy to find Connie lovers. So, and I think the looks have something to do with it.
I think you're onto something there. There's that old saying, isn't it? If it sort of looks good.
Yes, actually, that. I'm a big Kelly Johnson fan, the Skunk Works and all, and he used to, if it doesn't look good, it isn't any good, so.
Now, what other projects are still on your to-do list, Bob? Because you've sort of checked most of them off. You got the number 173 safely back to the museum. I see the 74, when we were there, was looking a bit dilapidated, but now looks fantastic with the coat of paint. That painting on the ground works out pretty well, doesn't it?
Yes, well, we painted with the rollers. We painted the 747 and the 727 with rollers. And there's a section in my website shows them painting with the rollers, so you can see what it looks like there. Lots of airplanes get painted with rollers these days for environmental reasons and other reasons, and it works great. They've developed the paint chemistries to adapt to that, and so you can watch them rolling them on, and you can look at the airplane afterwards. And I tell lots of people I was painted with rollers, and they all crack up laughing, thinking I'm giving them a line. But no, the airplane was painted with rollers. Lots of them are painted with rollers. Yeah, the 47 looks sensational now, and we're moving that into the new building starting tomorrow morning, by the way.
Wow, okay.
The 37 was moved in a few days ago. And the inside of the 47 has all been refurbished and whatever, so it has a lot of interesting exhibits in there and from flight test days and what have you. So the whole airplane is really in much better shape than when you saw it.
Yeah.
My next project, people all ask, and I tell you, my next project is to retire.
Are you still into the trains?
Oh yes, I'm still in the trains. Yes, but I haven't been able to pursue my train stuff all that much. Well, I've got to finish the Connie. I'm ballasting the nose, and I want to install 4 engines that I have on hand, and the interior needs to be installed. And then I've got this B-52 up at Payne Field in Everett, and next summer they wanted to cut it up too, but every so many years I have to throw my body in front of the train, and so I did that. And so what we're going to do with that is next summer we're going to refurb and repaint this B-52, and then the following summer we're going to move it down to Boeing Field.
So that's another flying job, is it?
No, that'll be a surface job,
right,
unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah.
That airplane, I think, has made its last flight.
Okay.
And then there's a DC-4 that I'm in love with up in northern Canada, CFIQM, that I'd really like to get down here. And then, of course, there's the 314 Clipper that's out there in the ocean.
Oh, yeah. That's the huge flying boat, right?
Right. That's kind of there, too. The local station has made a lot of videos about my activities, and then one of my next 3 were going to be the Lockheed 10E Electra, the Amelia Earhart airplane. And we've got that now. We got that about 2 years ago, so that took me about 6 or 7 years. We got an exact replica of her airplane, in fact, one that flew around the world tracing her route, including the missing legs. So that one is ticked off, and so then there's just the DC-4 and the Honolulu Clipper are left.
What about the Comet?
The Comet, well, the Comet is in Everett. It's under restoration. The interior is almost complete from the cockpit all the way to the back end. It's in kind of a tent structure, so I guess the next thing is to refurb the outside of the airplane. And I'm not sure, nobody knows really what the future is of the Comet. The Comet was supposed to move down to the new building, but there's no space for it now because Boeing decided to give us this 787 that kicked a bunch of airplanes out. So, I don't know where that Comet is going to wind up, but it'll wind up somewhere. We also have the prototype Lockheed Jetstar, which also was Kelly Johnson's personal airplane for 25 years, and so that's another airplane. That one I'd like to fly down to Boeing Field. It's in quite good shape, and so we'll see what happens with that thing. But, old Bob is getting old. He can't keep popping these airplanes out one after the other.
Who's going to carry on the work then, Bob, at some point?
Well, I don't know. I'm going to have you move up here, Paul, and you can do it.
I'll take over the mantle.
Exactly.
Well, once again, congratulations, man. It's a long effort over a long period of time, and you got exactly what you wanted in the end. I know that there was no doubt about that, but it was just so good to see that you actually got there and to see, the pictures and the film. Some of the videos are amazing, the aircraft just glows.
Well, it does. Of course, it does glow, and it's, I don't know, it's like an old dowager, she's in good shape. The thing about airplanes, the Super G Constellation is a really good example. She's drop-dead gorgeous there right in front of the museum now, and the airplane was basically designed 1939, and so now we've got this airplane, which was designed maybe around 1960, 61. Yeah, you can't beat the looks. Some things are just time immemorial, and she's going to survive all of us. That's one of the interesting things about it. The people who designed and built it and flew it, a lot of them are dead now, and pretty soon we'll all be dead, but the airplane will still be there, just as good at looking as she ever was. Paul, I just want to show you something about this airplane. If you look closely on this airplane, you'll find initials carved all over this airplane.
Here's a question. Are the initials still in the panels, paintwork?
Oh, yes. It's loaded with all the graffiti everywhere on that airplane. Yeah,
you wouldn't want to get rid of that.
No, we're not. Yeah. It's carved in there. We won't get rid of it. We couldn't if we wanted to.
Are your initials in there?
No. My initials aren't in there.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not in there. But I had when we brought the airplane in, there were hundreds and hundreds of United employees who had flown the airplane, pilots and stewardesses, and on and on. And a couple of them come up and asked me about that, and some of them, they wanted to show me where their names were, initials were.
Wow.
I told them, geez, if you'll show me where you put that in there, I'll probably call the cops and have you arrested for defacing the airplane. But
an artifact. You're doing God's work, basically.
I believe I am, and you just in a different way. God has us all work differently, right?
And that was my interview with Bob Bogash, the project leader of the team that restored the first 727 and ultimately flew it back to Boeing Field to the Museum of Flight last week. What a guy, eh, Martin? What a cool guy.
There really is. It's always good listening to him. There is a man who knows what he wants and he knows how he's going to get it.
And he gets it. Just to remind the folks, Martin, quickly, that we are going to step up our activities of communications, right, with our audience.
Yes.
We're going to start using Twitter and all these newfangled ways of communicating, so we'll try and sort of pick up the tempo of that. And Martin, you'll be tweeting things out and connecting with people, won't you?
Yes, and the Twitter, you can discover it. It's at Airside Media, all one word. We also get a fair few emails coming in. For those of you who aren't aware of the email address, it's airside.media@gmail.com. And I've also received a number of requests from people who are looking for an RSS feed for the podcast.
Right.
That is available at clubcowrie.podbean.com. That's Podbean as in coffee bean.
Okay.
And people can go there and subscribe and they'll get the latest version of the podcast automatically sent to them every time we release it. And of course, we're also available on iTunes. If you just go into iTunes and do a search for Airside Radio, we will come up.
Cool. And we have our YouTube version, which includes video mostly. And I know people leave comments on there, and we do look at them. And if there's anything noteworthy, we will mention it. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. That's our program for this fortnight. Paul Brennan in Wellington and
Martin Noakes in Palmerston North.
We'll see you again soon.
See you later.